Welcome to the Homelab Show, episode 122, Why the Fundamentals Are Important, with special guest Veronica Explains. She's going to explain to us why the fundamentals are important.
It's me. Hi.
Hello.
I'm so glad to be here. It's so great.
So glad to have you back on the show again. It's been, actually, I'm not going to say how long I think it's been, because my sense of time lately is just so off. Yeah.
Well, we're excited. We do not have an ad read for today, but good. Thank you for people who reached out to us. I've just been bad about getting back to those people who want to sponsor the show. So we will get that sorted out soon.
It's so hard to get back to some, it sounds easy, but at the same time, it's like editing video, producing video, the website, this, that, and the other thing. It all adds up. But
there's a lot.
Do we ever call out for a business manager, someone to do the business behind the scenes, the things we don't want to do?
Yep. I'm an inbox zero person, so anyone that emails me gets a response. Can't promise when, but they will. That's how I say it. But yeah. Anyway, we're not here to talk about like our email procrastination issues. We're here to talk about Homelab stuff. So yes. Veronica, we're going to talk about why the fundamentals are important. And I kind of feel like off camera, when we're complaining about small little problems in OBS that seem inconsequential, that's not quite the same thing as we're talking about, but it's an example of a small thing is a big thing. And when you're working with the shell, and the Homelab, it's got to get the bases covered.
Well, absolutely.
I want to comment on something. I think one of the reasons you think a lot about the fundamentals is the same reason me and Jay do. We all like a lot of the retro tech stuff. And it makes you think differently about the computers. I think about my TRS-80, the fact that I had to peek and poke memory registers to push the limits of the hardware to get the thing you want. So you get these different level building blocks kind of coming from that space to think about the modern systems that we have now, which are substantially more complicated, but the fundamental systems work in a very similar way.
Yeah, it's amazing how having experience with vintage technology, stuff that that didn't abstract away the insides of the computer, quite literally, how that can influence how you approach any sort of modern device. I don't want to say that modern computers feel like consumable peripherals in a different way, but I think there's a similar vibe to it. Like you start to look at what you use every day as components to be manipulated instead of just, like a magic rectangle. And that makes such a big difference in terms of how you approach your stuff, but then also how you approach your data and how you approach your everyday needs with computers here in the roaring 2K20s. So it's exciting.
It really is. I just love classic computing. I feel like it kind of scratches an itch that isn't scratched now. I think this is exactly what you were already saying. Just maybe I'm saying it in a different way. It's just, you have all of this technology that came before, and you have what we have now. And like you were saying, it's kind of like a product that's one cohesive whole, but we may not necessarily want it to be one cohesive whole. So they sell you a computer with the operating system built in. Obviously, nobody wants to turn on a computer and not have it work. And they QA the operating system to work with the hardware and work with this and work with that. And they produce a product that, as far as they know, does everything on the box. And then we get it. We strip the operating system out. We put a different operating system on it. And maybe we'll change the Wi-Fi card. And, here they are trying to sell us one product. And we're trying to, it's almost like the mentality didn't change, but the hardware did. Do you agree with that?
The hardware evolved. The hardware has continued. It has become more complex. I think it's definitely harder. For example, we talked about peeking and poking. If you don't know, you're changing memory registers on like in ancient RAM, basically by using basic commands in order to set different variables. And we obviously don't have that need anymore because we have so many more powerful tools that abstract that away. That's very different than it used to be. But understanding where we came from can be a really big benefit toward understanding how to manipulate even a server, where understanding how this application, you're looking in the logs and you start to see that you're having memory issues or something like that. having that experience with it when you only have 64K of RAM or 5K of RAM can help you in troubleshooting situations where you have 128 gigabytes of RAM.
Yeah, and I do. And it's like I feel so spoiled. I don't even know what I could use it for. But I remember when I had like 64 megabytes of RAM and I bought this gamepad and I couldn't use it because it required 15 megabytes of RAM. So it's either use the gamepad or the game, but not both at
You
the
can't
same
do both.
time because you can't have them both. So I had to, and then when I upgraded to 128 megabytes, I thought, oh my gosh, I could have my gamepad and my game at the same time. I mean,
no one's
we have now.
ever needed more than 128 megabytes of RAM. It's a myth that you really need more than that. You can get everything done. Like,
I mean,
5K
Commodore
of RAM
64
is
online
enough.
with that.
Yeah, exactly.
Our game systems on
Exactly.
and, you know, I'm playing, you know, I'm playing PS5 games and what does it have, like 8 gigs of RAM or something?
I mean, this thing's got 16, this is a 486 here, and it's got 16 megabytes of RAM, and that's enough. I'm able to get, I could write scripts on this thing. I could do very basic HTTP only web surfing on this thing. There's a lot you can do with a little bit of information or with a little bit of power. And I think it's so helpful for home labbers to see how this stuff works in configuring and building out your modern day systems, because so much of home labbing is doing more with less and getting a feel for how you can work with very constrained resources can really help give you perspective on what you need and what you don't need in the modern day.
I agree. I used to develop games for fun, not something that I'd never developed anything that anyone would want to play on purpose, but it was fun to, you know, just write some code. And my mentality back then was to find the slowest piece of crap computer I could possibly find that barely runs and get their game running reasonable on that old piece of hardware. And then it's like conceivably fine on anything after that point, because if it'll run on something older. But to your point, though, the fundamentals are important. And this is a funny story. I don't know if I told this on the Homelab show before, but I had a game that I wrote. I was, you know, pretty proud of it. I sent it to some friends. For me, it worked fine. I sent it to them. And then everyone who played it, when they resumed a save file, they resumed their save game in a random level every time. Now, when I get the game on my system, I cannot reproduce this 100% of the time. I always resume a save game properly. And I you know, pass the code around and everyone says, yeah, it should do exactly that we don't see a problem. I spent 2 months trying to figure out why I had this bug. And then eventually I just had a random idea. How about I just use memtest 86 on my computer and see if my memory is bad? And sure enough, the RAM was beyond terrible. I was having no errors on the operating system. And it's weird that the game would work fine for me. And the only reason why I could think that would be the case is it's correct as compiled in my RAM. But in good RAM, it's not quite the same thing.
Absolutely.
And there I was troubleshooting for 2 months an issue that wasn't even the code, because sometimes we don't even look at the hardware. Like, do we ever look at the case to see if a capacitor is blowing anymore? I mean, I didn't, and I wasted a whole day trying to fix something.
You know? If you want to learn how to fix problems in a bash script, a really great language for introducing yourself to some of these concepts is BASIC. And that's, I still maintain, if you can build some very simple tools in BASIC, that's going to give you fundamentals that you can use for bash scripting or Python or other languages later on. And I'm so sad that we don't have more BASIC being taught. You know, to a certain extent, BASIC has been completely subsumed by Python.
Yeah, most people start with Python.
Exactly. And Python's a great language, don't get me wrong. I think Python is a much more fun language to actually build in every day. But I think a difference with BASIC is that so much of BASIC is built around manipulating the hardware, and Python abstracts this layer from you, for the most part. And I think that we lost something collectively when we moved away from a language that for the most part required you to manipulate directly how your system, like the physical hardware, and that took away from so many learners, so many students, the ability to understand really what's going on in this thing. And I wish we had a language that could replicate that. Because right now I just don't see it. And I think BASIC was the last time we really had that.
Well, and one of my complaints has been, it just drives me a little bit nuts, and maybe you as well, the amount of frameworks that people attach to things today, because I look at still, and Steve Gibson being one of the outliers out there, still producing stuff with assembly language. You're like, wait a minute, how is this thing so useful, but is still measured in kilobytes? And it's interesting because you see some of these apps, you're like, wait a minute, why is this app 9 gigs? What does it do? It's a printer driver. It's like, what did they add into this thing? But you're right though. There's an abstraction layer removed, and it's trying to remove from the hardware. And I guess they're trying to get more people into programming, seems like that. But I agree with you. Understanding the fundamentals, thinking about the hardware, you can roll back all the way to like John Carmack and Doom and all those people writing that. They really thought a lot about the hardware to truly optimize and get the most out of it. And I don't see that as much, especially in the games right now. You go back, I love the stories from the Atari days, the Nintendo days, especially when you've got these developers who have really talked about how they made the game and all the tricks they had to use to make it all work, right down to like, this is how we tricked the hardware into allowing this sprite to show somewhere else on the screen, things like that. I've always found those really interesting, because now they're like, I don't know, just include 20 different large libraries. What are you doing? I'm drawing a cloud. It needs 20 libraries. It works now. Just have them download all that.
It's strange, because I mean, technically, and Veronica, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm sure you know more than this than I do, but I'm pretty sure I read that games like Mario 3 back then, with the amount of memory and everything, and I think even the original Kirby were impossible on the NES. And I know we're not necessarily talking about games, but it's kind of the same thing. We're memory constrained, and they're writing in assembly language for that, but they still had to work around the hardware. And then PC games, nowadays, people are complaining if a game doesn't run in Linux, and I'm just glad I don't have to adjust like a pin on a sound card or something to get it to work with the game that I'm trying to play.
The last video on my channel actually talked about this a little bit, because I was talking about how to copy game cartridges. I happen to have a Game Gear cartridge right here. I was talking about how to copy them onto your modern computer. And I went into how those game cartridges often included additional pieces of hardware, which made things that would have otherwise been impossible on those consoles possible. And that was such an important part of computing in that space constrained and that hardware constrained era. This is why systems like the Atari, which is a 1977 system, were able to keep making games for 10 years, because slowly but surely more and more hardware was being packed onto those cartridges. And that for them, that really did help things along. That's also where the change over into optical media and other types of games made a difference. It was because the underlying hardware was getting good enough to where it could consistently outperform what you could jam into a cartridge. That's it does, any sort of vintage programming does give you a really good baseline for how all this stuff connects.
And I think these are really good fundamentals to learn. And I don't know if you've seen this video, but it blew my mind, and it's wonderful. It's easy to find. Maybe I should add to the show notes, but type in making a CPU in Excel, and someone built a CPU using Excel. And I really like about it, and I shared it a few times with people going, this will understand how registers and everything work in a CPU. This is a series of different, really basic fundamentals. And by the way, yes, they're all being done in Excel, which I thought was absolutely it was all those thought experiments someone had that turned into I think video's got like 1 million views. It's super easy to find. But it's a good teaching moment where you start thinking about these. This is how CPUs work. These are how the data moves through these. And these are good building blocks. And, I don't, before we get way out topic on this, do you have some things besides BASIC? What what are some other fundamentals that we want to make sure we impart upon all the Homelab users that are listening to us?
Well, getting beyond vintage computing, which is one of my favorite topics, obviously, talking about more modern stuff, I think anybody who's going to Homelab, and I know this can get controversial, I think anybody who's going to Homelab really needs to have a really good understanding of Bash. And even if you're using a web GUI, which, I mean, something like Cockpit. Yeah, I love Cockpit. Or Houston is another, which is very clever. Houston, Cockpit. Rockets taking off. It's great. But the idea of, these are great tools. And as a system administrator, I've certainly appreciated them. But when something goes wrong, you're going into Bash, you're going into the shell. And specifically, a lot of the time, our bodge fixes, which will keep something afloat until there's some sort of update from upstream or something like that. A lot of the time we're having to monitor and manage that stuff in Bash. And I think that translates just as easily to the Homelabber who might need to build out scripts in order to manage their stack and monitor their stack. Even if your other monitoring is failing, even if your other management software is failing, you've still got to be able to go back and do that. And I think that Bash is super important. I love Bash cookbooks. There's all kinds of, I think No Starch has a Bash cookbook that's pretty good. I don't remember what it's called. I don't think I have it on my shelf up there. It might be downstairs, but there are so many great books to help you get started that you can pick up for not too much. And, you can get started with just figuring out some of those fundamentals right there and just try stuff on your own.
So the interesting thing about Bash is that it seems like it's one of those technologies that you always have to know, even if you don't use it, because there's so many people that'll switch to ZSH or whatever their favorite shell is. But then they'll find themselves eventually on a machine that they haven't installed ZSH on that doesn't default to it. So they have to install it. So they're using Bash, or they're not allowed to install that at work. So they have to use Bash at work. It kind of seems like some things that we replace are really hard to be a 100% replacement. Even if we have a favorite text editor, VIM or Nano or whatever it is might not be installed by default. So you still have to know whatever is going to be there most likely. So I feel like Bash is just one of those that is like you said, it's for me, in my opinion, it's not controversial. It's just true. You have to know it because you're going to be on it. You're going to be using it. So,
and eventually. I mean, you can live in the terminal if you want to live in the terminal. I live in the terminal a lot of the time. I do a lot, like my, I watch your channels. I'm watching you from an RSS feed from my terminal. It might open it up in YouTube. But I'm seeing, I don't trust the YouTube algorithm to actually tell me when you have a new video out. Right. So when I actually figure this stuff out, it's usually through the terminal, because the terminal is just bog standard. And something happens to my computer, I can reset everything, and it's simple terminal stuff. And there's GUI ways to do this, and there's cloud-based ways to do it. But all of that adds additional abstraction away from the parts that I like to tinker with. And in my mind, that's kind of the ethos of the Homelabber, is that ability to tinker with and play with and manipulate these tools. And you've really got to have that terminal background, that command line interface down.
So question here, what RSS reader in the terminal is your favorite?
Okay, right now I'm using Newsboat. I've always loved Newsboat. I don't sync. I'm trying to figure out a way to sync Newsboat against like Nextcloud. And right now I'm doing that manually with just Nextcloud itself and configuring it that way. But I would like to be able to potentially carry my Newsboat reads to my phone, and that's something I haven't figured out just yet. So
I'm still using Fresh RSS because the web UI works, so I can be wherever with it.
Oh,
But
absolutely.
yeah, I'm such a sucker for anything I find in the terminal. I love terminal UIs. They are,
me too.
they're like, that's always a superior thing. I do not look forward to a world where maybe those are not as popular. And I know I'm already in a world where those aren't as popular as the main ones, but I feel like, will the next generation keep developing these? That's my hope.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I feel like the computer science layer is being lost in time, and in some way, even though that is, I'm not saying that that's a overlap of every home labber, but I have to imagine there's a certain subset of people that have a home lab because for them it's the most current modern way to get that same feeling where you have control of your hardware. You can swap in and out different things, whereas, you know, like we were saying earlier, these things are being sold as just a one cohesive product, and you know, we're the people that want to, you know, micromanage everything. But in the past, we always had to micromanage things because we had to change a jumper on a sound card or this or whatever to get a game to work, or put your paging file on a different hard drive so you can get some better IO on your spinning Rust or something. You know, we dealt with all this, but
I just had a nightmare when you said that.
It's a good thing that the kids don't have to deal with this stuff because they could just do what they got to do and get it done faster. But there's still that layer of how does this work and how did we get here that I don't want to see go away, because I feel like that's very important.
At the same time, though, on my 64 gigabytes of RAM, very nice computer that I'm using right now to participate in this stream, the other day I had an issue where I was trying to render a video and was running into some RAM bugs. And the quickest solution, and I had to go buy new RAM and I couldn't get to the store. But the quickest solution to resolving the render bug was bust out my terminal and set up a swap file and just work off of the swap file. I rerouted the process to the swap file, opened up the application again, started the render, and it worked just fine. And that's the kind of thing that, you know, you'd think that we've gotten beyond, but we haven't gotten beyond. Anybody who's participating, like I wouldn't necessarily have to be a system administrator to have benefited from that. I just have to be somebody editing a video. And that could be your graphic designers or, you know, anything else like that. I knew how to fix it. And that was great, but having that understanding isn't something that just benefits the nerds. It benefits a lot of people who just use computers. And I would love to see more of this taught and explained. And I think that home labbing is a way to get this experience in the real world practically.
Well, and it also serves as, like it did for me this morning. I learned I can break XCP-ng in a way that the developers go, that shouldn't have worked. And so I told them I had my lab set up, so I tore part of it down and rebuilt it. I'm like, nope, it does exactly this. You're like, it shouldn't do that. So now there's a new pinned comment on a video I've released recently, but it's such a good test bed because this is an enterprise level product that, you know, you use out there, but it's completely accessible in the home lab. It's fully open source. That's why I've been doing a lot of videos about XCP.
Right.
But you know, the home lab enabled me to go through all these little processes and everything else. I'm doing on like these really cheap 4-core mini PCs because it's not about performance, it's about reproducibility of a problem. So we can look at it, walk through the code, look through the database, and go, oh, for some reason it thinks secure boot is on, was the end of it, but it doesn't produce the certificates for secure boot. But it says it's on. That bug was not supposed to exist. That was supposed to be fixed. It goes through an auto magical process to set up secure boot certificates, but turned out it wasn't actually copying the search where they're supposed to go, but left the flag on. So
absolutely,
yeah, it was little weird things. But this is where home lab, you know, I'm working with the developers, everything else. Got my lab set up. It's sitting there behind me, and just a couple of mini PCs tied together, and it's fun because you can really get into the nitty gritty, like you said, of sorting something out that was really esoteric and not doing this in production on Fridays.
Right, exactly. Yep. Well, and then you get the extra benefit of when you understand these fundamentals. If you like, let's as an example of another fundamental, Git. let's just use Git as the example. Understanding how Git works in a way that lets you peruse the branches or create your own fork to get some work done not only can help you resolve a problem directly without having to work through the upstream or work through the creators of the tool, but then allows you the potential to be able to help contribute back. And anybody who's a Homelabber, understanding Git without needing a GUI tool. I mean, there are great GUI tools, but there's always going to be some goofy thing, that you can't easily achieve in the GUI tool. And being able to get that stuff done is extremely helpful in a home lab. It's always been helpful to me just in terms of identifying which version of this particular, which version of Nextcloud introduced this piece of software. Let me peruse the Git and let's see if I can figure this out. And then let's see if I can push a change to my server on my home lab to see if I can fix this, to then see if, oh, I fixed it. Well, here's a bit of information for anybody else who's going to be running into this problem. And that's how we contribute to better home labs for everybody.
Yeah, the collaboration in the community is absolutely huge right now. Wendell brought up last week, and I thought this was a really good point, and it kind of ties into everyone's like, oh, isn't AI going to just solve this for us? And AI is going to be this, we don't need to teach people to code. And I've seen someone threw that in the comments. Not at all. The goal of the NVIDIA CDO is to make these stock go up and to the right. Our goal is to actually educate people because we just want to see a better community. And what Wendell brought up was really a good point where, because the one absolute thing that we have learned from the AI stuff is it's a regurgitation machine, and it can regurgitate garbage in an unbelievably fast manner. And
it's also great at garbage.
Yeah, and Google can slurp up that garbage and bubble it up to the top. So it's not the end of search because you don't need to use search. It's the end of search because now they can fill it with garbage. But we know now we seek the opportunity that Tom, Jay, and Veronica can be these watering holes of real content that tells you things where you understand, oh, we want to help build the community so we have a purpose. So you can start just ignoring the search and going towards some of those validated watering holes of information that we have. So the reasons I've talked heavily about why I host my own forums, why level 1 Techs host their forums, is because I don't want to put my data in some proprietary Discord server somewhere where it's locked away, and maybe Discord we're just waiting for the day Discord announces it's all going to some AI, all the stuff in a Discord, and we're going to lock you out of it because we can, and you built on our platform.
Yeah. I like Discord just fine as a chat app. It's great as a way to just chat with people, but as a knowledge store, it's pretty lousy. And I think that people, especially open source projects migrating to Discord for their support, we lose something by not having that stuff in a forum or in a public space. One project that has done a really good job of keeping this stuff public is the Ultrabook project, which is actually my next video is going to be about. It's about getting Coreboot running on Chromebooks, and they have like native vanilla Coreboot, because Chromebooks use Coreboot but in a different way. And long story short, they have an excellent forum and docs page that's all open source, and if they have a Discord, they don't surface it, and they usually say, we want to talk on forums, we want this stuff to be public because we want search to find it and we want people to discover it, which I think is a really smart way for people to do open source. But that's also how we used to do open source. And we kind of became used to useful chat apps becoming a place we don't really have to get out of. And I feel like we've lost something with that.
IRC for the win.
I love IRC.
Yeah.
No, I do too. It's like I haven't used it in so long, but I kind of want to, just because I like it. I
kind of want to go back as well because I'm not the number.
I'll spin up an IRC server.
The spam on Discord, it was never this bad on IRC.
Yeah.
Well, and with IRC, I have the benefit of being able to get this thing on it.
That one. And it works great in terminal.
Yeah, exactly.
Because Discord's rather large for a chat app. I use it only in a web browser, but even then it does consume some amount of RAM in the web browser. But if you load it as an application, one, I don't trust it. I don't need it on my computer, but I'm like, it's kind of big.
It's huge. Right. Yeah. I don't use Discord. I don't use any social media on my phone, but I don't use Discord on my phone, and I don't use Discord on the computer itself. I only ever use it in the browser.
Yeah.
And it's fine as a chat app, but like it's doing an awful lot of RAM for a chat app. And but I know that the people behind it, I'm not picking on them, but they're not necessarily optimizing it for productivity. No. They're optimizing it for eyeballs. And my fear with Discord is what happens when the money you talk about stock going up and up and up.
Yeah.
What happens when there are opportunities for them to take advantage of our data with that? That's always my concern with stuff like Discord.
Like Reddit.
Yeah.
Reddit's ongoing deal to sell data. It's not just a one-time deal to train data. They have an ongoing agreement to have all their data sold to AI. Now, I'm not the one that could. I don't want to segue us too much because, that's an interesting topic to think about. But it's anytime you lock yourself up in any of these apps that you don't control the platform itself, the platform will eventually do what the platform does. And
absolutely
more so if it's VC backed, if it's either venture capital backed or if it's beholden to the stock market, because it always has to go up and to the right. That's their goal all the time.
Yep, that's how it works.
Yep.
Nope. I love IRC. I mean, IRC has its flaws and its strengths, but with IRC, you know what you're getting, which is chat. You're getting it's not pretending to also be a BBS, and it's not pretending to be a document storage, and that I feel like it makes home labbing harder. It makes running your own services and self-hosting harder to hide a lot of these great tools and the documentation for them behind a social media website. And I love the idea of forums making a comeback, self-hosting your own forums making a comeback, and documentation making a comeback. I remember the days of spiral bound notebooks for your programming languages, and I want to come back to that. That to me seems like a great way to, I saw in the chat somebody talking about kids learning this stuff. Kids like reading if you give them books.
You mentioned
that's pretty much how it works.
I have this overwhelming urge to pop open my Commodore 64 box or take it somewhere else, either cut my internet off or take it somewhere else where there's no internet and just nothing but electricity and a monitor. And that book that it comes with that teaches you how to program, and just like have a weekend off the internet, just that book, that Commodore 64, lots of pizza and soda, and just have a lot of fun, just like people used to do. Because, that it's so cool to go back and see how they did it, but a lot of people don't realize this. Your computer came with a book that told you how to program for that computer. Like, it wasn't just a computer with applications you run like we have now. You got a book in the box that tells you how to make your own software specifically for that computer. So if you wanted to become a developer, you have what you need right there already. And other than a Raspberry Pi, I think that's the closest we have to a computer like that now.
Well, and even the Raspberry Pi, so much of, I noticed this recently, I bought a Raspberry Pi 1, the first one that came out, and it seemed like there was a lot of documentation and there was a lot of information about how to, hardware hack the thing. Nowadays, when you go to Raspberry Pi, you're seeing video. You're seeing it's made. I mean, I'm not saying video is not accessible. I obviously make videos on the internet, so I like video, but there's something that's lost by abstracting away some of this information into, hey, watch the video till the end to learn this. We need really great documentation. And the Raspberry Pi documentation's there. You just have to go digging for it to find it. But I love the idea of equipment and tools and stuff that you can just sit down, no internet, and manipulate. And that's a really great way to get into a zen with it. Because I've said this before, I'm going to say it again. Homelabing is like a garden. It's like having a garden. It's something you tend to. It's meditative when you do it right. It's a process.
We need to be a little bit more like Jeff Geerling. He does a good job with all his videos of having accompanied write-ups with them.
Yes. Oh, I've got that on I've been working on that.
Yeah. I mean, I channel my inner Jeff Geerling when I do some videos. I just updated some documentation for Greylog. I can't fix the video. The video was correct at the time of release. There's a change that was made, but I did tell people I have all the documentation linked. So I just went and updated the documentation to add a parameter that that is now required with the latest version. And so the documentation, if you follow my rules or follow my video, it says download from my GitHub. It's still, that answer is still correct. So I think that having the right mix is an important aspect of it, to where the things that might be dynamic, because videos are points in time. They don't, people are like, oh, it's an opportunity to create another video. I'm like, yeah, I don't have time for this. And I hate to have a bunch of people downloading something that doesn't work. So you have to have some separation on there.
It's very important. Yeah. No, I love written documentation. I mean, I love videos. I watch videos. I make videos. So, I'm obviously in the ecosystem of videos and I appreciate it, but I don't think you can beat a good documentation page. And especially if you can make that documentation page also something offline, that's huge. And a lot of really great projects have done a good job of, there's an EPUB version of this book or of this doc, or we wrote our docs page has a PDF offline downloader. You can just get the entire thing on a PDF and stick it on your e-reader and away you go. I love those offline moments where you just get to hit the thing and see what happens.
And one of the reasons I still like GitHub is it's easily publicly accessible. You can just clone my documentation. You can have copies of any of the things I put in there. And matter of fact, you could easily script this to auto update and let you know when there's a notification for a change in the docs. I think these are good ways to handle it. I do like the other solutions, like you said, EPUB, PDF, auto download, some way. So in case that information goes away, I have an easy way to mirror it locally.
Right, exactly. No, it's very important. And it also, I mean, that's another thing you can self-host is, all of the documentation for the projects that you're working on. And that is a valid thing to, have in a share somewhere on your network. I know I have one. I have an entire share devoted to documentation for projects that I use in this thing. And I mean, I use it periodically, but if something ever happened to me, somebody else could use it and that would be useful.
Yep. Yeah, documentation's amazing, and note-taking is something we've got into quite a bit on this podcast so far. So
I
definitely
have been using VIM Wiki for my note-taking for the last maybe 3 years. And
what's it called again? Did you say VIM Wiki?
Yeah, VIM Wiki. Ooh, and it, like you talk about command line interfaces, VIM Wiki has changed my life in a very positive way because it has a diary feature. And the idea of being able to hit a couple of commands, start a diary post with, here's the problem that I just found, and here's how I fixed it. And then this becomes something that's greppable, searchable. You can figure stuff out like that. Without even touching my mouse, I can create an entire post for myself for the future, an entire wiki article about how I solved a problem. That's magic. That's the best thing ever. So highly recommended it, especially for anybody who is a Vim user already and likes to stay in Vim mode for their day-to-day tasks. It's a great tool.
Well, the nice thing is portability. You don't have to worry about, as time moves on, text files I created 20 years ago is relevant today. I do some things in Markdown, but I don't think I've wandered far off the beaten path here on Markdown to easy, simple. I see so many people try to use more complicated apps that don't have easy ways to get the data out. And that's good until that app has a problem, or especially if it's proprietary, if it reaches an end of life or is no longer supported, does it have an easy export method to get it back over to the next format? Or using text and Markdown, there's no next format. That is the format.
Yeah, exactly. It's there. It's I can take a Markdown file and I can load it in MS-DOS and it's going to be fine. It'll work.
Yeah, I haven't used DOS in so long. There's some DOS games I really want to play. It's been a while. That's
I
every
mean,
time someone says DOS,
DOSBox
I'm like, I want to play it.
if you just want to play vintage games, there's some great DOSBox tools that'll get you there. I use DOS for all kinds of goofy troubleshooting or fun stuff just with ancient computers. But when I was doing COBOL work, a fair amount of the documentation was written in some sort of format that would only load on DOS. And so there were plenty of times I was loading up a VM with free DOS and actually installing applications just to load the like compiler troubleshooter for so-and-so COBOL and see if I can get into the man page or their equivalent of the man page that way, just to understand why somebody wrote code a certain way. And I mean, that's more of a professional thing than a Homelabber thing, but you know, understanding the fundamentals enough to be able to quick spin up a VM on my laptop and do that. I mean, that's super important.
I'm sure there's a lot of developers that are Homelabbers too. So I think it might be surprising just how up their alley that actually is. So
yeah,
a lot of cool stuff.
It's definitely a thing.
Well, my conversation this morning was helping someone with their home lab. They develop not publicly traded, but $1 billion company. They one of their head developers, and you know, I'm just DMing with them earlier today. I mean, absolutely, the crossover is incredible between these. Everyone, even if you're a developer for a very, very large company for big important products, you probably still have a home lab.
Right.
Yep.
Absolutely. No, and you know, it's so important to be able to understand the background tools, like, you know, getting back to Cockpit. I mean, Cockpit or Houston is putting out great information in a digestible way, but it's still using your logs. It's still using your information. It's still using systemd. It's still using the background tools. And when something goes wrong in Cockpit, and it does, you know, stuff happens. There's something gets out of sync, or like the other day, my my ZFS didn't come back online after a kernel update, and Cockpit. I went into it to see, will Cockpit tell me what happened? No, it's just like, nope. Can't, there's you don't have ZFS. And it's like, yeah, I do. So you know, I was able to bop into the terminal and get it fixed up right away because I understand the fundamentals. And I can imagine if I didn't understand that stuff, it would have taken me hours of searching maybe to find it. And I probably did those hours of searching over the course of years in learning the fundamentals, rather than just sticking with the GUI and trying to figure out how to do it from the GUI. I think especially if you're using a home lab, it just makes so much sense to learn the tools behind the graphics, to get into the terminal and get dirty with it, just to understand what's really happening.
I will say too, one of the reasons I like Cockpit is it doesn't mangle the underlying settings and configs. It's reading from them. I just seen someone in the comments show Webmin, and I won't lie. I in the earlier days, I mean, Webmin's been around forever, and I remember
Webmin's been around a while.
Yeah, I would do it, and I don't know what the status of Webmin today is, but the mangled config files that would occur from Webmin back in the day, I don't know where they're at today on that, but it certainly made it harder, because when someone who was smarter than me would look at some of the configs of things I'd set up, they're like, Tom, you should just learn the config file here, because this mess I'm going to start over. And I was like, so I learned at that point, like, oh, this isn't good. And mostly I quit using, I can remember last time I used Webmin outside of a demo to show that it exists. But yeah, now you kind of learn that, because now I understand the fundamentals better. Not to mention, when you put them together with good structure in your config files with some notes as to maybe why you set something, it gives you a better understanding of, hey, this setting I did change because of this, or this setting I did because of this. So I think that's a good way, like you said, kind of that fundamental learning and understanding it better.
Well, and especially if you're going to be home labbing because you're building your way up to a career, you're not going to be able to stick in the GUI forever. There's going to be points in which you need to embrace your inner terminal nerd. You've got to get in there, even if you're not in there every day, even if this is just a thing you do occasionally, even if all you're doing is managing websites, you know, and like, what's one of the, like cPanel or Plesk or, these kind of web developer oriented tools. I can't tell you how many times I've had somebody call me for a consulting gig back when I was doing consulting because their Plesk server was offline and they didn't understand why. And it's, and I'm not picking on Plesk. I think they make a fine product, but you have to understand how to use the terminal in order to administer and troubleshoot it. And they'll say that. They'll say, hey, you shouldn't install this if you don't know at least a bit behind the curtain. And so many people, I think, get into a trap. And it's like, if you just learn those fundamentals, it's going to save you the hundreds of dollars in consultant time to get your 20 websites back up. And that's time spent, but it's money saved in the long run. So big fan.
So question
that's
here.
The perfect reason why the fundamentals are important, because you have to, like you're saying, you have to understand those things. And I don't trust GUIs. I mean, they crash. I mean, it's just the way it is. Window managers maybe a little more, but the terminals failed me a lot less often.
So question here, for those of you that don't follow her channel and may not know this, Veronica's got a history in COBOL programming. Would you say COBOL is a good recommended fundamental right next to basic? Should people, okay. No one should learn COBOL? I mean, it's not a bad career, I know, but it's not required.
COBOL is a great career language to have in your back pocket. That's what I will always tell people. Legacy systems is a lot more than just understanding COBOL, because so much of it has to do with understanding hardware, and because so much of it runs on hardware, it's not a very often abstracted language away from the underlying systems. So like my understanding of COBOL was also tied to goofy things like understanding how invoice printers, like line printers, worked and things like that. It's definitely it's a niche, and it's a big niche, and there's certainly work in it. I am a little worried about AI not replacing COBOL, but the companies who've been still working with COBOL deciding now is the time to jump to something that says, oh, we'll use AI to make it better. I'm a little concerned about job prospects unless your goal is to work in government or your goal is to work in the public sector. I think there's still going to be a lot of that. And financial institutions are going to be running COBOL probably for another 400 years. But that's a very specific niche without a lot of there's more competition there than there is in the public sector. So if you want to work in the public sector, COBOL is a great language to have in your back pocket. For everybody else, I'm going to recommend something else.
Yeah. I just wanted to bring a COBOL question in it. So
doesn't it stand for a completely obsolete business-oriented language?
Except it's not. They're still using it. They're still building it. And the companies that are using COBOL, they've got some good reasons for it. It's not, I don't think it's laziness or like inertia that keeps people on COBOL. I do think there are some practical considerations at play with how the business use is. That said, it is diminishing as time goes on, and especially if you want the flexibility of being able to work on multiple projects, COBOL is not the language I'm going to recommend you consult in. There are a lot of better languages that I would think people would, even learning Rust and C at this point might be a better fit if your goal is the freedom to pick and choose your clientele, if that makes sense.
There's
or even Excel
focus on COBOL, narrow client base.
Yes, it's very narrow client base, and so much of legacy systems in COBOL is who you know, and that's, you can know the language and be fluent and an expert in it, and if you don't know people currently working in legacy systems, you might not get very far.
Right.
So that's why I say it's a good language if you want to work in government, because governments, it's if you have that background, you might actually have a great career hanging out for the entire 40 years of your career sitting in COBOL.
There's no end in sight for it.
There's no end in sight in government. So like if your goal is to work in government, it's a good language.
Yep. Yeah, I was just,
That
while you
and
were
.NET.
talking, looking at some of the syntax, and oh my gosh, yeah.
It's its own thing. It's very unlike anything else you've seen, and it broke my brain a little bit on other languages too, because like I forget what order variables go in, and goofy little things like that periodically. And you got to get used to looking at other languages after working in COBOL. So it's definitely a niche, and it's definitely a fun niche. But it's hard to get into, and that's a reason I wouldn't necessarily recommend it if it's your first language. It's a good one to have in your pocket, though.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I need to get some more programming done, and learn, and maybe learn another language. I don't think it's going to be this one though.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend. Rust is a lot of fun. I've been playing with Rust recently. It's a good time. I'm also, though, trying to learn assembly for the Amiga. So.
Interesting.
That sounds fun. That sounds even more fun.
68K assembly. So.
Wow.
All kinds of fun.
That would be an amazing project. Maybe I should try that someday.
It's a lot of fun. We can talk offline about it. It's not a fundamental I'm going to recommend to any of you.
I think it's right underneath my desire to develop for the Atari Jaguar, which is on my bucket list.
Yeah, that could be. I don't remember what processor, what they use for the Atari Jaguar. I know
the input processor was the Motorola, the same as the Sega Genesis, but the graphics chips were something else entirely. I can't remember though. I'm sure someone in the chat room probably knows.
Yeah.
It had like at least 3. I forgot how many processors, but I know it had at least 3.
I know I have some fun with 6502, the machine code or machine language for the 6502. That's some fun.
Well, this has been great. Do we have any more else, or I think we covered all the basic topics we wanted to get covered? Is there anything else you wanted to add, Jay or Veronica?
Want to or have time to?
You have time to. There we go. That's we're coming up on that.
Yeah.
There are some really great terminal to, I talked about Newsboat as a feed reader earlier, but to go back to that kind of GUI-less, the TUI tools to stick in the terminal. Newsboat and Mutt or NeoMutt, if depending on what fork you want to use, they both have a very similar user interface in the terminal, and I love using Mutt for managing email lists. And so I have a separate email address just for email lists, and the ability to be able to kind of go back and forth between my email lists entirely in the terminal, stripped out the images, and see those threads and see who's responding and how they're working. That has been an amazing productivity hack for me. And then you can edit your emails directly in VIM and reply, and you never even have to take your hands off a home row. It's absolutely fantastic. Right. So Newsboat has a very similar user interface to Mutt or NeoMutt, depending on what fork you're using. But I love that email client. And if you're just dipping your toe in the water on a more terminal-based lifestyle, that's a good one to try and learn and figure out, because it's pretty well documented. You can search for how to do just about anything, and it's a lot of fun to get configured and figured out on your computer in your terminal.
Well, it's been a while since I used Mutt, so it brings back some
memories. It's still out there.
For years, that's what I used. So
yep. Nope, it's a ton of fun, and it is a great tool to learn how to configure your terminal and kind of get your toe in the water without something as daunting as, say, VIM. VIM it will break your brain. Your brain will not be the same after VIM.
Yeah.
Once you've gone modal, you don't go back.
Yeah, that makes sense. Wow. I love it when I come away from an episode taking notes of things that I just need to look into afterwards. So many cool things that I want to get into.
Well, I'm very glad I could deliver that today, and I hope other people, if they've got any questions or something, I shoot I'm on Mastodon. I'm not on Twitter or anything like that, but you can hit me up on Mastodon.
And I left a link to Veronica's channel. Easy to
Yes, there
find
you
from
go.
there. There's she's got cool swag. She's got all the fun stuff and links to the different socials such as Mastodon. So
Yeah, the different social.
yeah, social. But yeah, we won't see that in the Pearl.
Yeah, but it's fun. It's a good time. I like Mastodon. It's my speed.
Yeah, that's pretty fun. Yeah,
there's less people, but there's the right people. That's how I look at it.
Exactly. Like, I don't need numbers. I just need fun.
Yeah, I want people to engage with that I want to engage with, not like, why did someone post that? That reply isn't relevant.
I mean, I try other social media from time to time. I dip my toe in the water, and it's like, but Mastodon's always fun. So
yeah, I've enjoyed the community on Mastodon, so I'm on there as well. So I'm on Twitter still for reasons I can't explain. So I can't justify. It still exists. I just keep my finger hovers and circles around the delete button, and I go maybe later. Maybe it'll get better.
It's hard when brands are there, like especially if you need to talk with brands as part of your work or your channel. That's really hard to get rid of, I think. And so
yes, that's pretty much why I'm there. I interact with a lot of brands. They retweet my stuff, which is often related to some of the videos I may do about their products. So there's this like piece dragging me there, but I don't spend much time on there. Like I post, I drop it and run. Like, hey, here's a post. Have fun, everyone. I'm not doom scrolling on this giant pile of whatever this is.
I mean, it's all doom.
Yeah, it's doom scrolling. So how I use it is definitely different than how I use the other ones. I can go in Mastodon and go, oh, look, an interesting post. Something intelligent that I want to read.
Exactly. It just feels it's slower, but like I like slow. It's fine. It's a good time.
With that.
I'm in there. There's actually a Mastodon client in the terminal too, which shares the same type of TUI interface as Mutt. I think it's called Toot. So
probably.
Yeah, I think it's called Toot. So I used it briefly. I don't have it set up on this computer, so I can't go into it to see if that's the one it is. But I usually just use the web interface for Mastodon. But yeah, I mean, it was a fun time. I was able to, post messages from my terminal and not take my hands off a home row. It was great.
Well, in all of us here, we all have websites that are easy to find and link to where you can find us, where we post things, where information is. So that's one thing is I'm big on that. I tell anyone getting started in YouTube, like create a home base for yourself that you own, your own website. That becomes the place you can send people to. Because I've over the years, I've switched to saying at the end of my videos going, and whatever socials you'll find me on, you can find them at my website, because that way it's an easier, I don't know what the future holds. So
websites still is important for SEO too. So, like anybody who's doing anything professional in tech, I think it does make sense to have a website. If you rely on LinkedIn or you rely on your socials, you can get a lot done there, but it's having your own website helps when people search for you. And assuming you want to be found because you're planning on going out for a career or something, having a website is still, you can't really beat it.
Today. I see people talk about like the ended websites and I'm like, no, sorry. Don't get
even if all your website is a link to other places you can be found. But if you're in this space and you want to make this your career, I think a website is really helpful for explaining what you know and documenting how you did it. And, to tie back into VIM Wiki, there are so many tools that, like you're in VIM. Oh, I'm going to quick write up how I did this thing. And then I'm going to hit a couple of commands in VIM and I just pushed it out to my website. Having the ability to do that and document your processes in a public space that allows them to not only be discoverable by others, but by your potential future employers is definitely something I recommend. And I have spent so much time working with, kids in 16, 17 who are thinking about getting into this space on here's what you should do to get yourself ready for that job market, because they'll say, oh, it's on Discord. Well, good luck having somebody find it.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, good luck telling the hiring department about something you did on Discord. No, you got to post that. And it does help.
My son uses to play when he plays games or something like that.
But even if that thing that you did was hack Minecraft, that's still valuable to some potential like employer if you're young and trying to get into this space. You know, show what you know. Even if what you know is hacking Minecraft, even if what you know is CSS, you know, I love CSS. If you understand CSS, document the crap out of what you know about CSS, because somebody's going to like that. And if all you're doing is talking about it on LinkedIn or socials, you're going to get, that's not going to be accessible to the people who are going to hire you. So yeah, hosting your own website, still cream of the crop in my mind.
Yep, absolutely. All right. All the links to our sites are all I'll make sure they're in the description down below. And thanks everyone for joining us. This has been great. And see you next time.
All right. Bye, everybody.